Good afternoon. Center Institutions. We're starting a little late today. We got held up on the floor. It's Thursday, March 28th, day before Good Friday. We don't technically have the capital bill yet. We got enough of it. It's been passed out of the House committee. We're just starting to get an understanding or trying to get an understanding about what's going on with it. We're gonna spend some time with Scott Moore from Joint Fiscal Office. Going over the highlights of the bill. We're gonna be joined by Damian in a bit, and we have Kate from BGS in here as well. And it probably will be a free-ranging discussion going over many parts as the committee has their concerns as raised by anybody who is telling us about what they're seeing. So, Mr. Moore, welcome.
Senators, good afternoon. Thanks for that section by section. Amy did that, but I went through and made sure that the numbers are correct. So yes, I don't have a copy of that, but
You want a copy of it?
I have.
Okay.
I wasn't, as numbers.
What do you feel comfortable doing, Scott? You feel comfortable? I'll have you introduce yourself first. I'm sorry.
No worries. Scott Moore, Joint Fiscal Office. So what I did was I tried to go through and re-listen to the testimonies that have been given. Because a lot of the questions you had yesterday had centered a little bit on the end, what happened, and why it happened. So I kind of just put together some quick notes as to what I was hearing, and I don't want to speak to anybody's intent per se. So I don't want to put my words in their mouths, but I do have some general basic facts about what they've had that will help the discussion for you all as to understand why, like for instance, Senator Harrison, the removal of that $550,000 from clean water. So with your blessing, I thought we could start at the top and we can kind of go through it.
Sure. I think that's what we want to do, as you kind of heard my introduction as far as before we went live is, before we really dive into any witnesses on each section, we just really want to understand it again on ourselves. So that when somebody comes in here, we already kind of know, what's going on with it. So, be patient with us, sir, or we'll
Absolutely.
but yeah, go ahead when you're good.
So if we go to the spreadsheet that I gave you all copies of, and we can start in section 2, the section on BGS. And what I'll do is, again, I'll refer to these kind of gray and burgundy sections, if you will. So going through on line 1 on the far right hand side in FY25 in the burgundy section, there's a pink highlight underneath the 8,717,000. Essentially, this is the BGS statewide major maintenance. And any extra dollars that we had, they rolled into that section. So that increasing it by $217,000 from Act 69 that's passed. And the government was the same for that.
So, Mr. Jerry, I'm just gonna,
Yeah, please.
so
Yeah.
to confirm that there wasn't a specific project or need identified
No,
for
it
that,
was
it was just a standard place to put extra
Yeah,
money.
extra money is kind of
Okay,
up there.
okay,
My joke that I had made a couple times was that all the money goes to Joe, so he can have more money to fix the buildings, and they appreciated that stuff. But that was what that was for.
Okay.
It wasn't like, oh, $10,000 to fix this window. It was, here's the extra money, we're gonna pump it there, so that way they have extra money. Especially because some of the other spots for BGS got tripped in.
sure, especially after the flood, but okay.
Line 6 is the next one, has highlights. If you recall, Act 69 had $400,000 passed in FY25. The governor recommended had lowered that. You see the yellow down to $350,000. So what our notes are saying here, the committee lowered it down to $50,000 total at FY25 in the burgundy. And my understanding from my notes is this Middlesex site, there were several buildings on the site currently. This is where a secure residential site had 2 trailers apparently. The site also holds the Old State Police Barracks, BGS Archives, BGS printing shop as well. So in FY 24, my apologies, in Act 69, between FY 24 and FY 25, there's a total of $750,000. So what the community was suggesting, and Kate, I'll look at you if I misspeak, but BGS is still looking at design and what they want to do with the site. And because of that, since they haven't expended the money previously, the committee lowered it down to just $50,000, so there's still some money to play with.
What was the intention? Do you know what the intention was when the governor did the report, when the governor made the recommend of 350,000? Do we know what the governor's intention was to do with that site, or BGS's intention to do with that site? Was it to just dismantle it completely?
So there's a radio tower there that we need to find.
Well, but just here, you gotta introduce
Oh,
yourself.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Kate Everly,
Yeah.
Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs for BGS. There's a radio tower there that is for DPS that needs to be relocated, or we need to figure out what we're doing with that. That part of it, there are a number of structures on the site and we do need to do planning to figure out what we're gonna do with that site, because those trailers aren't gonna be there forever, they are a temporary measure.
Okay, so but the 400,000 that was there before, was it, there wasn't a plan on it, it was more of a placeholder, was it? Is that fair to say, Kate, as far as, because $400,000 is a lot of money, so now we're dropping down to 50,000. And I get that, you know, okay, we're just gonna, there's 50,000 because we know we're gonna do something. But there must have been something that they were gonna do with the 400,000.
Yeah, let me look at my notes and get back to you with a.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Yeah, I'd just be interested, was that at BGS's request? That the house took out the 300?
No, that.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so. So if that money was to stay at $350,000 and it was to stay there, would that drastically change the plan as far as what you would be doing?
Address the procedure plan, sure, so we'd be doing, I mean, our intention would be to spend that money to be, to move forward on the planning for
Okay,
that property, yes.
okay. So we'll have some more conversations about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Joe would be happy to come in and talk about it.
Yeah, no problem.
So what I found out was just that, the project was taking longer, than they anticipated with all the different requests of BGS's time, especially over the summer, and it was not as prolonged as planned, so the house committee felt that that money could be used in other places as well.
Okay, so what I would do on that one committee is I would write, then we're gonna have some more discussion on that, so.
Yeah.
Mark that in some way, shape or way form so that we got it covered in quadruple this. As far as, so then we know we're gonna spend some more time on that. Yep. Anybody want any marker pens?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Damien just got here, would it be helpful for him to walk through all the language, because there's more policy stuff at the back.
What do you guys think the most important thing is for us to do?
You have some children at home that I don't have, so I'm happy to cede my time to you and then do it after, if you like.
Either way works.
Yeah, who's got more pressing time? Cause I don't care. Whatever works, you guys figure it out. Whoever wants to talk to us and whoever's got,
Just want to be respectful of your daughter, so.
No, that's fine. I appreciate that. So how late are we planning?
we're gonna
for
spend
tonight?
an hour. We're gonna be done by 5.
Okay. Maybe I'll go first and then I can I'll still be available to do a drop off at activities.
That way,
So.
Yeah, I'm good. You guys good with that?
Thank you for your flexibility.
Yeah, you guys good with that?
I appreciate your flexibility too.
So.
I have a cat at home who's not gonna miss me if I'm.
Oh, you won't tell your cat you said.
Yeah. They're less forgiving than dogs.
And they're sneaky.
Shouldn't have that debate on the record.
No, probably not. Sneaky in a good way.
All right. Let's see. So, you have
Tell us who you are, Dana.
sure, you have a summary in front of you. Which,
You gotta identify yourself. I apologize.
I'm sorry.
No, sorry.
Damian Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. It's good to be here. Clearly.
Well, thank you for, I want to thank all of you for your,
Related.
thank all of you guys for your flexibility. We apologize, we were late on the floor.
No, that's okay. It's okay. It's that time of year. So I'll walk you through the policy sections, starting with section 10. In the bill, you have a handy summary that I've prepared, which is sort of a shorthand of what's happening here. So in section 10, it takes what is essentially obsolete language relating to consulting with and receiving approval from the Department of Buildings and General Services whenever the Commissioner of Environmental Conservation wants to make capital improvements and instead reflects existing practice, which I understand has been existing practice for quite some time, where it is the DEC Facilities Engineering section that executes and consults on design for Department of Forest Parks and Rec, provides professional engineering services for compliance with operating permits, and is the custodian of all plans of record for work executed by Department of Forest Parks and Rec. So this is essentially a technical change because this has been existing practice and we're updating the statute to reflect that. So
I guess that language is not in this,
it is, I'm sorry, it's on
Is it page
page
10?
14.
Oh,
Section
oh,
10.
thank you.
It's section 10.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, it's section 11, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Okay,
Section 11, 10 BSA 2603.
okay,
So my eyes just jumped.
yeah,
All right,
thank you.
two large potholes in the first minute of testimony.
No worries, you got it over.
So section 12, also on the bottom of page 14, this should look very familiar to you because it's very similar to what's in S 312. As always, the details do differ. But this would require a one-time study and report back from the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife to this committee and your House counterparts regarding the feasibility of continuing operations at Salisbury, of transferring production to the Edweed hatchery, and of alternative options for replacing the production capacity at the Salisbury hatchery.
Mhm.
It requires the report to identify repairs, improvements, and other work necessary to obtain any, for the Salisbury hatchery to obtain the permits it needs to continue operating after 2027, with an analysis of costs. And then for Edweed, identifying any repairs, improvements, or other work necessary to transfer that production capacity, since Edweed couldn't do that in its existing state. And then third, to examine the alternative approaches. So the House approach, the Senate approach, is an annual check-in over the next 3 years. With the primary, I think the upfront stated goal of trying to maintain the Salisbury fish hatchery and then exploring alternatives if that's not feasible. The House's approach is a one-time report to bring it back to us next year for a decision at that point. So obviously, there's a little bit of a divergence there,
Mhm.
but I think both bodies are looking at the same issue, just slightly differently.
where I'm at with that committee is that, I think this is more of a directive where we actually have something that's moving forward. I think that, what I like about the bill that we passed out of our committee is that we are willing to concede that the fact that hatchery is gonna close. And that we've given them the flexibility of the language that if they wanna keep it open, that then they have to come back to us and they have to tell us, or if the legislature wants to keep it open, they can, they just have to supply the money of it. I think that it was here, I'm not upset if that fish hatchery closes, as long as it does exactly what our bill says. Our bill says that they are going to make sure that we do not lose any production and stocking. Fish eggs, anything like that, and that they're gonna show us the great plan as far as it moving forward. I'm also not upset if that fish hatchery closes, because, it's like this. the 3 employees that are there right now have places to go. And if they do what they're supposed to do, like that's in our bill, that everything is going to be assumed not only by, Ed Week, Fish Hatchery, but maybe other hatcheries as well. So, I mean, we have basically said to them, hey, listen, do what you wanna do, we realize that you wanna close this place, but at the end of the day, make sure that we don't lose any production of stocking or fish eggs or anything like that, so, I don't wanna start digging my heels in and making positions, I just don't know why if we spent $550 this year, we spent $100,000 on top of that just to find out probably what we're gonna find out for free by them coming back to us each year that we've asked them to come back, which is December of 2025, December of 26, and then January of 25, January of 26, and then December of 27. So, but that's kind of where it's at, but you know, you guys are gonna have your own opinions on that as well. So, yes.
Given the fact that it's on the historic, registry, one of those 3, or maybe not of those 3, somebody is gonna have to stay there and maintain it, cause it'll be a kind of a tourist attraction at some point.
Right, it might not be a fish hatchery before it's all said and done, it might be a museum, it might be something, it might be something else, but.
But we can't just close it and walk away and say,
Right.
it's been a great time.
Mr. Chair, if I may, before I came down, I was listening to the House. While the House is on the floor, they're discussing the budget right now. And they did mention that they did build in the $550,000 appropriation for this year. So even though we may not see anything in the capital bill,
Right,
the House did say that they had built that in, just so you have that,
That's how-
that confirmation.
nice to know, because it's like a Sasquatch, we've been hearing that it's there, but we haven't seen it yet.
We looked for it too.
Yeah, we did, we've searched for
We're
it.
trying to add 3 things to back over here.
Not a Sasquatch.
Yeah, so committee, we'll have some more discussions about that at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Where, you know, if anybody else has anything to say on that, I mean, we're gonna, yeah,
Just a question.
Yeah.
And about this structure of the plan. So, identify the work necessary to obtain permits.
Yeah.
That's okay. I mean, I might want to say like to keep operating. So is the Ed Week fish hatchery and the alternative approaches, are those kind of overlapping? Like is Ed Week one of the alternative approaches?
So Ed Weed was in the House, in the testimony they got, Ed Weed was mentioned as the most likely of the state fish hatcheries to be able to absorb or grow its production capacity.
Okay,
My understanding is that there are various complications to Ed Weed doing that, not least of which is that it would need additional infrastructure. There are also potential issues with the location on Lake Champlain and the water it has and its ability to stock other parts of the state. I'm not a fisheries expert, so I don't pretend to understand that, but I do see these two, there's nothing that prevents them from saying as one of our alternative approaches, 20% of the production capacity is absorbed by Ed Weed and 80% is absorbed through these other, could
okay,
be one thing,
so-
could be 5 things.
so that was exactly what it is.
Yeah.
So like,
There's
I would,
nothing that makes them mutually exclusive.
good, so I would just say it's picky, but examine other alternative approaches on number 3. That's all I was
Okay.
getting at.
which is
Yeah.
what,
What's the structure?
which is kind of what we did on our
That's-
bill, right? I mean, we gave them
Yeah.
flexibility, because they had kind of said, and I'm not trying to, you know, say, oh, our bill, blah, 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 I'm not just trying to,
Yeah,
but I thought we were pretty thoughtful with the damage help. Because we had that same language that you just talked about, we gave them that flexibility, in fact, we said that, hey. You might even just find that you might just go purchase the eggs, you might, you know, you just as a. But we'll make sure we get, we'll get those guys
Yeah.
in here.
And just a background kind of thing that I'm assuming that production capacity includes not just quantity, but quality.
So,
And you don't have to answer that.
right,
I'm just-
the House chose
Okay.
to use the words production capacity.
Yeah.
Instead of stocking capacity, because Representative LaRock pointed out that there are other things like egg production, brood stock production, that, you know, brood stock will stay at the hatchery, they're not gonna go out to actually stock the water bodies,
Okay.
and so. He believed that production capacity just was a better description of the functions that were gonna be lost,
Okay,
but I think fundamentally. The interest is in making sure that when. When something happens here, you're either keeping the existing hatchery open and functioning in a way that it can keep getting its clean water permits, or you're replacing what you've lost by its closure.
exactly.
So I think from that standpoint, some of it is just, word tweaking, and
Yeah.
then some of it is the more fundamental approach of the 3-year regular reports with the intent statement that the Senate has versus this where you have a one-time report. And it doesn't actually say it's our intent to do X, although. Some of the members in that committee, I think, would agree with your intent there. I can't speak for them, but.
Right, no, well, we like that. Once you
but-
can give us, I mean.
Yeah, it's, so, and I can't speak for all the members, but I think the interest is there on all sides on this issue. And the devil's in the details as always. So,
Okay.
yeah, that's not as much as I'm.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Everybody good with
fine.
that? Yep.
All right.
Okay.
So, section 13, which amends section 22 of last year's bill. This is pretty straightforward. It relates to the 108 Cherry Street property.
Yeah.
It adds new language, which is at the bottom of page 16. And it basically requires that from the proceeds from the sale of that property, $6.25 million would go to the property management revolving fund to recover the deficit that the fund incurred when they originally purchased the property. And then $293,000 and change would go to the state energy revolving fund to repay outstanding debt for energy improvement loans related to projects at the property.
Yep.
And those are the only things that they owe the
Yeah,
state.
otherwise it goes back to the bottom line in the capital bill, anything over and above that. So this is just making sure that we're not carrying debt as a result of that property after it's gone from the state's portfolio.
And why would we have specific numbers instead of just saying the balance as of the date of sale? Because these numbers probably change. And with time.
We'll defer to Nick here.
So for the record, Nick Kramer, Department of Finance Management, those numbers actually, Senator, are fixed because they were incurred years ago when the property was being developed and built. The ongoing fee for space costs are something else. This is a fund that hasn't been used in a while, so these are debts that we've been carrying for a number of fiscal years that have just are sitting on the books, and since there's no ongoing revenue source, since that property is vacant, this is the best way the state has to pay.
So we could have had this language months ago. I'm not saying we should have, but we could have.
Yeah, it's,
I guess what I'm thinking is when we decide to sell something, it'd be good to have its, what it owes to the.
right, so this was part of the
State.
governor's recommended budget, this,
Okay.
if you look
Yeah.
at your.
Okay,
It was.
okay, so we just
yeah,
have it,
in the
right,
January governor's recommended, it
Thank
was there, so it just didn't make it until last year's bill. For whatever reason at that time, but it was in the governor's recommend this year, so the money, this is, I think. Pretty much verbatim what was in the governor's recommend,
okay,
so.
great,
And the issue, the reason we would have to pay them off is they show up as debts and liabilities on the state's accounting and get factored into what CDAC looks at.
no, we should pay our debts, I believe in paying our debts.
So section 14 relates to the former Williston State Police Barracks, that property right off the exit at Taft Corners. And what this says is the sale of that building right now it's being used for storage by the Department of Public Safety. And they're looking at selling it probably in about 2 years. Give or take, based on their testimony. So prior to authorizing the sale, because they can't sell it without authorization, the House basically said it's the intent of the General Assembly that the town of Williston shall report to the House Committee on Corrections in January 2025 regarding whether the town desires to purchase the property, and if so, the feasibility of them doing it, such as, you know, do you have a bond vote coming? How are the town finances looking? Is this something that's likely to occur? And then also, are there requested conditions? For example, they want the appraised value rather than the value that it might get on the open market, or something like that. And then potential future uses too. So and what this relates to is, there was a lot of discussion. There is interest from the town. The town manager was in the committee a few times, discussing it. But it's not clear, given the financial state of Williston and so many other municipalities right now, it's not clear whether the finances will want to allow them to take on a bond, or two, whether the voters will support a new bond. And so there's that question. And then the other piece that came up in the House committee was there was a healthy debate between the members of the committee about, you know, should we be giving sort of a preferential purchase right to towns where maybe they can get it for a little less than the property would cost on the open market, particularly there where that's likely to be an expensive property on the open market, or should the state be getting top dollar for the property? And if it's not getting top dollar, are there things that you want to see there, like something that's going to benefit the state on a broader scale? And the bottom line was there isn't enough detail at this point, and it's far enough out in the future that rather than authorizing the sale, they asked for a report back. The House Committee on Corrections and Institutions language really comes from that they didn't know if you would also want that report. And so they just asked for the report to come back to them, since they'll be proposing the
Yeah.
budget.
So.
I
We could
added
certainly
Senate
put
institution.
in the Senate here, so that was.
Chair Evans knows my thoughts on that, so I can imagine that they were right also. And I think that we're gonna have some very healthy debate on it as well, we had before.
Yeah.
And I think we'll have some more. One of the things I wanna put into committee's minds. Because I do, you know, I do wanna have a good long thought process on it with everybody's thoughts and opinions out there. If it ever got to the point to where, Williston was able to purchase it and we were able to get to that point. And no matter how that it worked out, you know, we don't need to debate that today. One of the things I kind of want to put in your minds is that we're just not going, I wouldn't be interested at all in having them take that, property. The plans didn't work out and then turn around and sell it for, I want to have it deed restricted. That we would know the use, like they have asked in here, the intended use. And if it wasn't to be used for that, there's a lot of different things you could do. You could come back to the state for a predetermined amount of value, or that, no, that's what you said you're gonna use it for, and that's what it's gonna be used for a specific amount of time. So I want to keep it from, I want to protect the taxpayer as much as we can. If they're just not gonna take that property, see the value of it. Oh, it didn't work out, we couldn't make it work, and okay, now it's cash. So, so it's just another little twist to it as we go into that, and which I wrote a note about that, so we'll bring it up again.
Okay, so the next section ties into this one pretty neatly. This is amending, so this is section 15 on page 17. It amends 29 VSA 166. And this relates to the authority of BGS to sell or rent state property. We're only affecting the language around selling property. BGS actually asked for this language here, and it came out of this discussion, and they said, you know, we already have language for state armories, because back in the days long before I was here, some of the armories were sold for $1. And so the legislature a number of years back said we should really be selling them for fair market value. BGS said we should have the same language here. So it says fair market value as determined by the commissioner in consultation with an independent real estate broker or appraiser, or both, unless otherwise authorized by the General Assembly. So the out is that you can always say sell it below market value to such and such a party, which you could do as a preferential right to purchase for a municipality or something like that. But this essentially reflects the current best practices of the department. And ensures that, you know, with the future commissioner, that won't change.
How does it, I don't wanna get off topic here at all, but you brought something up about the armory. So where we were purchasing the old armory, and Waterbury, which is outside the Capitol, and they were gonna go and they needed to purchase the land in St. Albans. And then before they could ask for the federal earmark for them to build the whatever $30-50 million structure, whatever they're gonna do on there. Whereabouts in the way does the state actually end up owning that building? I mean, like we do in Waterbury now. Do you know that?
I don't know off the top of my head how that process works.
Yes.
I'm happy to speak to it.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, if you want. So the current process that we landed on was to authorize the military to purchase property in St. Albans, which they needed to do by a certain deadline to be eligible for the earmark, which they got. I'm sure folks followed along.
They did get it?
Right. So that's good news. That all came together. And the mechanism that we used to do that was to authorize some sort of temporary spending authority out of one of their special funds that typically is funded by the sale of armories. So they used that, and then we worked with the House Appropriations Committee and your colleagues across the hall to include a transfer from the general fund to that special fund to fund that. And I can confirm that that's in the House construct budget as of today.
But how does it end up being that after we get the earmark for the monies, or they get the earmark for the monies? How does that end up being a state asset?
Well, so they're purchasing the property,
Mm-hmm.
the land, and then the earmark is for planning and design for the eventual construction of a facility, which we would own as.
So that even though it came from federal dollars, they're building it on, we own the land, and then once they do that, and then there's gonna be a lease. There's gonna be some type of lease agreement between the federal government and that building, that property.
It's a good question, Mr. Chair. I'd have to defer to my colleagues at the military. I wouldn't want to speak out of school on this, but based on the conversations we've had, I don't think the federal practice in recent years has been. They fund a number of capital construction projects for the military specifically, and I don't believe those come with strings attached in the sense of federal ownership of the facilities. Or if they do, they expire after a certain period of time.
Okay.
So I'm sure Adjutant General Harder would be happy to come in and speak it more into that.
Well, we'll get there some point in time, I guess. I'm just.
Yeah, no, those are good questions. So does the state now own the armory in Waterbury?
We do. Yes, so that was since.
So we
the
have a
state-
title.
The state of Vermont already owned the armory under the auspices of the military, and now it's been transferred, I believe, to BGS.
And the shelter is there the shelter set up?
I believe so.
Was that one of the 4 sites?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, cool. Anyone else on that?
No, that was good. So no.
Okay. So section 16 on page 18. This relates to the former Windsor State Correctional Facility. So as those of you who were on this committee a few years ago will remember, you authorized $400,000 to begin demolition. At this point, demolition hasn't begun yet for a variety of reasons. But about $22,000 of that has been used. So this directs, basically what this section is doing is directing BGS in consultation with the Mount Escutney Regional Commission to prioritize which buildings should be demolished first, including any environmental remediation and salvage that might go on, based on future development possibilities for the site. And it would require the commissioner to notify the chairs of this committee and your House counterparts of the buildings proposed for demolition, and also require that the environmental testing and demolition and other work begins in this calendar year. One thing that Scott will mention to you is you'll see that $378,000 in change that hasn't been used from the prior capital bill was reallocated and put back into this line item, just so you can track the total amount. With $100,000 addition, so I think it's 478 that's available now.
So this is my thought on this. Again, you guys are all gonna have thoughts on it as well. I don't know, in a tight budget year when we're scrambling and scraping and all that, that is wise just to spend monies to tear down buildings when we might have some other buildings we're trying to keep from falling down by themselves, and that might need some attention. So I don't know that if I'm gonna be really excited about tearing down buildings when I know that we probably have needs elsewhere. And so what I would ask the committee to do is kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we run short on bonded dollars that we have places for, that we have $400,000 sitting around that we might be able to do something with on something. It might be in Windsor, it might be in Essex, it might be in Rutland, it might be someplace where we have a need. I'll set Melissa, thank you. If we might have a need, or we might tear down some buildings at the old prison site. So, but at the end of the day, I don't know if maybe that isn't the best use of money when money is very, very tight. That's kind of my thought. Maybe that's what we'll end up doing. What I don't want to do is I don't want to go through this whole bill and say, oh, what did you do? Oh, every decision of theirs is bad. I don't want to do that. I don't want to sound like it is, but I want to keep our options open. That if we, we're someplace and we through talks with everybody that, hey, you know what, we really should be doing this and we didn't get the money. So that's kind of where it's at. Scott.
Mr. Chair, if you wouldn't mind, I'll tackle a little bit with Damien, some of the things we can kind of do together.
Yeah.
But one of the thoughts I had captured from the House Committee was, there is some time to do some work at the site. And potentially, if it's going to be sold, keep it or sell it. Could you tear down some buildings and then maybe make it a higher market value for the site? Could you add a building and maybe make it more amenable for someone to buy it? So there was some of that discussion as well. So it wasn't just necessarily demolishing the buildings because they're dangerous. It was kind of like, let's take this down, and that makes the site more appealing, as you know, from a real estate point of view.
And it might not. I mean, I just sold a house, just to add to that, which I appreciate the context of that. I just sold a house that somebody bought and they never moved into it, and they asked me what they could do to make it better. I said, nothing, just let me put it back on the market. And the people did, well, they couldn't help it. They did $20,000 worth of work to the house to make it better. The people that bought the house took that back every bit of what they did and said, I wish they hadn't done that. So, and we might be in that situation there. We might be making assumptions. You can't make, what I always tell my agents is, don't make assumptions for what somebody or another buyer is gonna think about doing. So again, my mind isn't made up one way or the other. I wanna keep your guys' minds open that, that may not be what we do. It might be what we do. But as far as what we know, we have $400,000 sitting there. There's another thing that's going on that we're talking about this site as well. I really want you guys to be aware of. They're talking about, I think we might have touched upon it a little bit in some of our testimony when we had the people from Windsor in there talking about trying to put a housing project in there. I know that Fish and Wildlife or A&R has some interest about some of the surrounding properties around there. I'm gonna be very, very cautious about what we're gonna allow them to take. If it's what we could deem as properties that are more wetland type of areas and they want to protect them and they want to try to put some trails through there and all of that. What I don't want to do is start nickel and diming this great asset that we have and start taking some of the value away, so that when a prospective owner comes in there and wants to give us top dollar, we've given away some valuable land, just to kind of do something. So, I want to keep that in mind as we work through that site as well.
Good.
So.
And that is great segue to the next section.
Okay.
Section 17, which requires Fish and Wildlife and
Bless you. Bless you.
all set. In consultation with BGS to evaluate the potential to transfer a portion of the property into the adjacent wildlife management area. So the property was originally 900 acres. Number of years back, they transferred 800 of those acres to Fish and Wildlife and created a wildlife management area. The proposal came out of looking at some of the surrounding lands, so some of the grasslands are nesting grounds for certain birds. And so they've been keeping those mowed so that and mowing around the birds nesting schedule to keep that from filling in, but some of them are also steep slopes or wetlands. What the committee said though was come back to us with an evaluation that delineates the portions that could be transferred. And what would be left to develop with any setbacks required, because there's concern that you may have setbacks from wetlands or from habitat that are required if you do some of that. And then also the other piece is, I believe the wells for the property are currently in a wildlife management area. One of the things they were talking about is just identifying any rights of way or easements that you're gonna need if you're gonna develop or redevelop the property. So that would go on the report, it would be back next January. It does not lock the state into doing that transfer, but it says give us more detail on it. So they, for the portions that I was there for, and Scott was in the committee more than me. They looked at some maps that had some general outlines, but didn't get to anything more concrete than that. So.
One just quick question,
Yeah,
so the
absolutely.
800 acres those are wildlife management area,
Yeah,
and that's done, right? That
That's
can't
done
be
deal.
undone,
yeah,
I think
So-
2015, 2016 is what Sharon said.
okay.
yeah, so that was done a ways back. And that's. I don't know the details of all of that property, but some of it's wooded, some of it's steep slopes. And it was buffered around the correctional facility.
Okay.
Have you ever been there, Senator?
Yes, I've been there in person, it's a beautiful site,
Yeah,
yes.
there's some really
I've
nice
always-
pictures. And some-
Always wanted to go down and have the pictures.
I was there right
Beautiful.
before they closed
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
as a prison, yeah.
So section 18 changes gears a little bit. So this was generated out of a bill that came in the House asking to name the 133 State Street after former Governor Hoff. And right now, authority for naming state buildings lies with the General Assembly. Except in the case of transportation facilities, where it's with the Transportation Board, and geographic areas where it's with the libraries, the Board of Libraries. So originally, there were a couple of different proposals that came in. One was a study committee, one would have created a board. BGS said we don't have capacity, ACCD said we don't have capacity. So what this is asking is for a study from the study group mentioned in here, which is the State Historic Preservation Officer, the Secretary of Commerce and Community Development, Commissioner of Buildings and General Services, the Historical Society, the State Librarian, the League of Cities and Towns, and the Office of Racial Equity to come back with a proposed process for naming these that takes it out of the legislature and gets it out of sort of the political arena where you have proposals coming in to name potentially a party that's in the majority, but minority party political figures aren't considered and other things like that. That's basically the proposal here. It goes into more detail below. Does specify that it has to be an entity within state government other than the General Assembly. And then asks for methods by which the public and municipalities could ask to name a building, requirements for historical nexus, etc. And now it's another January report. First report would be sometime before September 1st, called by the Historic Preservation Officer, but after that, the committee would choose its own chair.
And it's sunset forward.
And it does sunset, ceases to exist next January 30th. 15 days after the report is due. I always do that just in case they as often happens, are running late. Give them 2 weeks where they still officially exist, so.
I'm gonna tell you guys this, that since the time that I've been here, and even now, even whispering now, I knew this was in here. This is probably the hottest political football that you ever wanna handle. It is just one of those things that just keeps on going around and around, and there's very strong opinions about it. And we're gonna run into those as we go. So, don't be surprised where this thing takes you. It's gonna have a life of its own before it's all said and done. So.
I serve on the transportation board.
Yeah.
I've 7 years, and we've had a lot of these, and so we do airports. And other transportation facilities, and so, yeah, sometimes.
So if you think we're just gonna go
Oh,
through
no,
this little section in
it's-
10 minutes, that's not gonna happen.
Right, and it is important to have, to try to depoliticize it as much as possible, and I'm just suggesting that you might have parks also in here, not just buildings.
So, I think the authority
Well,
for
parks
parks
is something
may lie
else.
with Forest Parks and Rec, but I'd have to check on that.
And I would suggest it doesn't need to be in here, but just when this board gets going, or this committee chats, that they should talk to the transportation board and to the,
That's actually in there.
Is that in there?
They have
Okay,
to
good.
consult with the Transportation
just,
Board and
just
Board
to
of
get some
Libraries.
history about how
Yep.
fun this process is.
Yes, yes. So the next section is a placeholder section. So this is relates to the forensic facility bill that the Senate passed last week, sent over to the House. There. Basically, this comes out of if the forensic facility is going to require a new building. BGS needs to start doing work to figure out what the facility requirements would be. But because the language there is still in flux, that it was just kind of left at requirements for individuals who will be housed in a proposed forensic facility, because it seems like even I think at third reading, you had amendments regarding some of the definitions, and I think the House has strong opinions in some of the committees, so they were starting to, they had a much longer version of this, and they cut everything back to this as a placeholder. So that's,
I can tell you, what I know, is that we will be dealing with this, and there's gonna be some people that are looking for money that are a capital bill for this. That's coming from appropriations. So, this will be something that is going to be, something we'll be dealing with. That, the House, did deal with, or were asked to deal with, but it's gonna be on the Senate side. So, as that, as I know more, as I can say more with some certainty, but we will be. This will be something that will be putting an ask on our capital budget.
right? Next section, so this relates to the short-term stabilization and treatment center, that DCF is working on, putting together, and basically, BGS is limited to no longer than 10 years on a lease agreement, a ground lease. And they're prevented from doing it at a below market rate. The proposal here is to basically do a lease for a design build proposal. And it's a long-term lease. So this would give them authorization to lease to the developer who's going to design and build and then lease back the facility to the state. Allow them to enter into a 20-year lease with 4 or 5-year renewals, so up to 40 years. And BGS can testify to this more. But my understanding is the bottom line is this is the potentially the most cost-effective approach at this point, given the haste with which this facility needs to get stood up. So, and the commissioner was in to speak on this in the House, and I think she can do a much better job explaining sort of the needs and the realities, but this basically gives them a carve out from the statutory requirements that they could pursue that.
Can I just bounce back to something while we still have everybody here? The $100,000 that they're asking for the study to go on as far as the Salisbury Fish Hatchery. Yeah. where did the 100,000 come from? Where did that, money for that, where did that figure come from? Did they say, well, we think it's 100,000, or we know it's 100,000, or did they?
I believe that that came out of an exchange with Commissioner Herrick. I don't know if he specifically said 100,000 or if that was the number that they put in their stuff. Do you remember?
I'd have to go back and listen to testimony again, but from what I remember, they said, how much would it cost to do a feasibility study? 50, 75, 100, and I think he kind of just said, yeah, like if you had 100, that would be enough. to Do a good feasibility study.
How excited was Commissioner Herrick about that? Not at all.
That's a question.
That's,
I won't speak to the motions, but I'm happy to watch the testimony again and opinion after I watch it again. But it was.
Without getting anybody in trouble, Nick, do you want to
Might be
speak
good
on
to
it?
have
Yeah,
Commissioner Herrick answer that question.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't think there was a defined, we know for sure that it's gonna cost 4 contractors to come in and do environmental study and like a. So it wasn't a defined 100,000, I think it was more generic 100,000.
On we go.
so, sections 21 and 22. Are very similar to each other. They set up 2 summer special committees. Comprised of, the first is for the capital complex flood recovery, and that's the joint fiscal committee. With the chairs of this committee and your House counterpart. And the, basically, the job of these special committees is to meet to review and recommend alterations to proposals, in this case. Proposals and plans for capital complex flood recovery. And if there is an instance where approval needs to be granted while the General Assembly is out of session, this gives authority to that special committee. And then requires quarterly updates to the committee. From the Commissioner of BGS just on progress with capital complex flood recovery. The other is for State House improvements. And that is the chairs of the 2 institutions committees. And your joint legislative management committee. My understanding is that the schematic design is due sometime this summer. And here they've set a date of honor before July 15th for a draft. That the special committee would review and recommend alterations to, and then September 15th. For a final schematic design that could be approved so that BGS could move on to the next step. In the process, so. You'll remember that originally schematic design was set for late last fall, early winter. And then for a variety of reasons we're at this stage here, we've had to delay things to get here. So this is just allowing for that to happen during adjournment so that you can move forward.
So is this something that was asked by BGS? All of you, or did BGS ask for this so that they thought that they wouldn't be delayed with anything as far as to have this study committee? Or, so I mean, isn't this something you guys would already be doing? Isn't this something you'd be moving ahead with already? I mean, is this committee? I'm gonna be careful here, I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble, but is this a committee that's of any value? I mean, what is this committee going to show that we're not, what is this committee gonna flesh out that BGS wouldn't be doing already on their own?
Well, so the first committee for the flood recovery, we do want to make sure that we have authority to do what we need to do to respond to the situation. Summer.
And so it's really a contingent approval there. It's approval if necessary, otherwise it's just review and recommend.
Okay.
With the other one, it actually tracks the language from last year's capital bill. And it's right down to the opening language to allow BGS to begin design development phase. It's the intent to approve the schematic design so that they can move forward. It's been updated to reflect the presentation of alternatives last year. I can't speak to the timing here, but I think the intent is to help move along the State House project as quickly as possible there.
Okay.
But I think you'll have experience with this from last summer that it's difficult to get JLMC to meet.
Yeah.
And
You know, we met all summer.
yeah, so obviously something that's worth thinking about and considering whether this is the best way forward. Certainly is sort of a policy consideration. The thing about the capital flood recovery is that is based on, it's a very trimmed down version of what we did for Waterbury after Irene. With Waterbury was much more prescriptive. Here, this is basically saying if you need approval for something, otherwise just provide updates.
So they help me with, again, one little bit more, I don't mean to be, I like to tell my committee all the time, keep asking questions until you understand it. This is what I'm doing. Who's asking for this on section 21? Who came in and said, this is what we wanna do?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I know the direction for me, came from the chair, but I also came to the process late, so.
Okay.
I don't know that this came from, it sounds like it didn't come from the administration. So it may have come from the committee saying that we wanna do like what we did.
Speaker. Could be, I mean, not try again,
Yeah.
again, I don't want anybody to put words in anybody's mouth and get everybody, just wanna know where it came.
Yeah, it might be worth touching base with the chair of the House Committee.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know for me, the request came from her to get that into the draft, but then the committee reviewed and approved, so.
Okay.
But yeah, as you all know, I joined the process about a week before the
No problem.
deadline, so. Section 23, this relates to a couple other powers of the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services. One thing I will say is it came to my attention when we were doing the walkthrough with House Appropriations. In a hurry to draft this, I didn't think about maybe putting this with the other section where we adjust the authority around the sale of properties. Might make sense to put them together. It's not gonna change the outcome of the law, but it did result in confusion for some people as to why we had language in two separate spots. Does a couple of different things here. The first is at the bottom of page 25. Right now, if the commissioner wants to buy an option on a piece of property while the legislature is not in session, while waiting to basically keep the ability to buy it while we're waiting for legislative approval, the commissioner can't pay more than $75,000. The understanding is that that is starting to become too little when you're talking about more expensive properties. So rather than having to come back every so often to update the dollar amount, this would set it to 5% of the listed sale price for the property. As a reasonable amount, so that would work it would basically meet the existing threshold at about $1.5 million property. Just to put it in perspective. The next change is to subdivision 19.
Well, sorry, so this is an option, so.
This is buying an
so
option.
The final purchase of the property would still be approved by the General Assembly.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep, and that language is in the existing law and would stay.
Okay.
The next piece here is really a technical correction. It didn't get updated when we switched to a biennial rather than an annual capital bill. So I think we're 16 years late, but better late than never. And so we were talking about the ability to transfer balances. So subdivision 19, which is not changed except for that annual to biennial update, allows the Commissioner of Building and General Services to transfer unexpended balances that are in the same section of the capital bill. So if it's in the A&R section, you can transfer from one expended balance to the other, but you can't transfer between sections. When you're within different acts, so say there was something that was authorized in the 2021-2022 bill, and it's an unexpended balance. If it is less than 100,000 currently, the commissioner can do it with approval of the Secretary of Administration. If it's more than 100,000, the commissioner needs that approval plus the E-board approval. This would just up that value to $200,000, again, to keep up with increasing construction costs. And then the last piece is use of the contingent fund. currently, if it's under 50,000, the commissioner can just pull the amount out to cover the shortfall. If it's more than that, the commissioner needs the approval of the Secretary of Administration. This increases that threshold to 100,000.
Per project.
Per withdrawal from the contingency fund to cover a shortfall. Yeah, so if there's a shortfall on project, you can withdraw. So yes, per project. Took me a minute to get there, but we're talking about the same thing.
Okay,
It is per
so-
project,
So
yeah.
you can do 50, 20, 30 for one project, you
Yep,
couldn't do
so
100,
let's say
100.
Project A in the current bill has a $25,000 shortfall.
Yeah.
Commissioner can pull from the contingency fund. If it has a $75,000 shortfall, the commissioner needs approval from the Secretary of Administration before the commissioner does that.
Okay.
So, and this was something that BGS requested and they can testify to it.
Okay.
Can I interrupt for a moment? I'm sorry. Joe just reminded me that we actually did request that language and it,
Okay.
the church group.
Yep.
Damien always tells us the truth.
I tried to. I tell it to you to the best of my recollection. And to the extent I'm not constrained by attorney-client privilege. So, there's that issue
Yeah.
too.
That's important.
The next section amends section 28, so section 24 amends section 28 from last year's bill, which is the site location proposal for the women's facility. You notice one, it's pushing out the date by a year because they weren't able to do the site location proposal. And then two, it's saying, so last year you said when evaluating site locations, give preference to state-owned property. This year, because of some of the difficulties in finding a state-owned property, the next section will talk about looking at both state-owned and other property that can be purchased. So this says, regardless of whether it's state-owned or not, it should be near support services, programming, and work opportunities needed to facilitate reentry, and in reasonable proximity to the existing workforce to facilitate retention and continuity. So it's trying to address some of the programmatic needs that corrections has with that proposal. So that's the change to last year's language. Then section 25 ties right into it. And it requires, provides contingent authority to purchase land if BGS cannot identify appropriate state-owned site locations. With the same requirements that it be near services and supports and in reasonable proximity to the existing workforce. And then requires quarterly reports beginning in July 2024 and ending in January 2025 on the progress in identifying state-owned or other property in which to locate the facility. So the main piece there is the contingent authority to purchase land. And then section 26 also ties into that because one of the thoughts that they're looking at on the House side is if the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility site becomes vacant, could it be reused for a men's reentry facility? Now, that's not necessarily reusing the facility, understanding that the facility is in rough shape. But a couple of different things are being looked at here. One is whether you can update the existing facility in a manner that would support the programmatic goals of DOC for an evidence-based facility, or whether you can repurpose the site without the existing facility. So demolish some or all of the existing facility and then repurpose the site then, given its proximities to, you know, services and employment and other things in Chittenden County. So that gets through the DOC. Are there questions on those? Because they all kind of tie together.
Yes, go
Not
ahead.
now, we'll
Okay.
have
I'm
time
sure.
for a question.
I'm sure. So The next section, section 27, authorizes the purchase of land as needed to renovate or replace the Washington County Superior Courthouse in Barry. And also requires the commissioner to consult with the city of Barry and keep them updated on progress. So there was some back and forth about whether the city had been sufficiently consulted with and was being kept up to date. So this is just being put in there to address that concern. And then the other piece is that it came to the committee's attention that they may need to purchase land, whether both for the possible renovation or alternatively for replacement. So this is authorization.
What's going on with that courthouse?
Yeah.
Is it? I mean, it's old, it needs stuff, but, so is the land that they're considering purchase, has it been identified, or is it the adjacent lot?
We're exploring a number of options.
What's that?
We're exploring a number of options.
Okay, so nothing's been determined, you just wanna be all the, okay, sounds good.
Last piece here is basically we're currently leasing office space across the street from the Windsor Superior Courthouse in White River Junction. And that's being used as swing space during the renovation. They want to use it as the new office space for the state's attorney after the renovation's done and the court staff move back into the courthouse. It's closer, it's in much better shape than what the state currently leases. So there's information on it in the governor's.
So if you guys, were you guys
Yeah,
on,
we had
did we have,
presentations
okay, I didn't know if I had a
on-
one-on-one meeting on that, if you guys were.
Yeah, no, leave it there.
Okay, so
Yeah, it was
everybody was
good.
here, yeah, so everybody was happy with that, okay, good.
Makes sense.
So that's it. It takes effect on passage. Obviously, lots to discuss. And I've run you past 5 o'clock,
That's
so.
fine. Linda, I don't know if we're gonna be, if we get out of the earlier tomorrow, I'd like to meet, but if we get out by 2, could we meet from 2 to 3?
Your call.
Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we meet from 2 to 3.
You want to bet on whether or not it's gonna happen?
Oh, I don't see a whole bunch of the calendar, but no, probably not, but,
Yeah.
if we could do that, would
I think
that
that's
work?
very reasonable.
Mr. Chair, the one caveat being that they're gonna be reporting the Capitol bill on the House
Yeah.
bill tomorrow. So
Yeah.
I.
Maybe getting, yeah, we may be on the
Okay.
floor, but it may also be getting bumped to.
So let's play it by ear.
So,
Just
So you guys have some
Yeah.
flexibility. I understand that everybody's schedules, is what it is. You can't make it, you can't make it, but if we do get out early, I'd hate to waste the time of an hour. Thank you very much, Damien, for that.
yeah, we can let you know on the House floor side. Obviously, I think Scott's taking the chair tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I just want to let the committee know I have to depart at about 2:40
Okay,
for a school pickup, so.
that's fine.
But yeah, anything else that I can prepare for you for tomorrow, or?
I'm good, but is anything, before we leave, Scott, was there anything that you wanted to add to any of this, before we left for the?
No, I think going through, I was able to chime in a couple times.
Yeah.
And then tomorrow or next week, or if you wanna see it later tonight, I'm happy to stay.
I think I can.
Your cat needs you.
My cat needs you.
Kate,
Uh,
anything that you wanted to add before we call it a day?
That'd be fun, but thank you.
Okay, so, and thank you for chiming in, please always chime in, the historical data, whether it's just was yesterday. Or whether it was discussion in the committees is, like I said, something that has a great story with it, that doesn't make sense to us, if it's whatever, we don't really have a say in the matter. I mean, we don't have a desire to change it, well, we might, I don't wanna just go and change something because it's what they did. And if we don't have a need for it, and it all makes good sense to us, it really helps to hear where the rationale was and what they were thinking. So any time of that, so we appreciate that. So other than that, thank you. We're gonna call it,
Thanks,
we're gonna
David.
call it, an act, okay, we'll go off.
Thank you.